Hey everybody, welcome to the Confusianity Podcast. This is episode 9, and I'm quite excited today to have actual other podcasters on the show today.
Professional.
They're my friends from the Your Friends podcast. And I love their podcast. I listen to it weekly. I didn't tell them this, but I cut my hair like once a week. And usually that's like the perfect timing where I'm just like cutting my hair and I listen to you guys' podcast. So
I like it. Some ritual, some consistency.
Yeah.
I'm into that.
Maybe we market ourselves as a hair cutting podcast. Like, do you need something to do while you cut your hair? Listen to your friend's podcast.
Maybe just one particular promo, like just as an offshoot.
We're always just looking for that thing, the thing that's
Right.
gonna make it.
Right. We're just looking to get really big on one thing, whether it's the secret shift, third result on Google, or people cutting their hair.
Yeah. So I'm here with, it's Ben and Diana, and Ben and I are friends from high school back in Augsburg, Germany. And we recently reconnected because a mutual friend of ours, Brian from high school, who was a prior guest on the Confusianity podcast, told me about Ben's podcast. And at first, the reason why I was listening to them was because how they came out of Mormonism. So that's because my friend Brian knew I was doing Confusianity, and I was like, oh, you should listen to theirs. So I started out listening for that reason, but they started talking about Mormonism less and less. But I still found myself listening because it's a great podcast, and they just talk about life and philosophy and just, week to week, day-to-day life and parenting and just everything. It's great. So I'm really happy to have them on today for episode 9. I would also invite my listeners to go and listen to their podcast, their latest episode. I'm the guest on theirs. So we started talking a little bit about Mormonism and religion and stuff there. So check that out as well. But to start this episode here and now, I do want to ask them to start out basically how they left Mormonism. I left sort of traditional Christianity. And oh, here's another shout out to their friends, Latter-Day Lesbian.
Yes, you got it.
And I listened to their episode this past week where Diana was a guest on there, and she got into her experience of being a Mormon and leaving Mormonism and what all that entailed. So I don't want to just rehash that exactly. So, but if you are curious to go deeper into her story, I definitely recommend you guys to go check that out. But specifically to start out, I want to ask you guys, because I was raised in religion from day one, and I think you guys were too, right?
Yes.
Yep. And now that you've come out of it, and when Ben and I reconnected a month or so, was it a month or so ago?
It was
right
couple
months
after
ago?
Utah, right? So it's been May.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
early May.
Okay, so a couple months ago, and the thing that I was surprised about was to hear that it's pretty new for you guys. Like, you've only been out of Mormonism for like 2 years, right?
3 years.
3 years.
Three
years,
officially.
Yeah.
I think it's probably been about 5 years since
Well, for me, the first thing that happened shortly. We have 3 kids, and it sort of the whole process of questioning anything and leaving Mormonism started right after our 3rd child was born, and he'll be 6 in September. So it's really easy for me to like landmark these things. So I'm like, well, I know that happened in 2013. So yeah, so it was a process, but from the last time we walked out of the building and never went back, it's been a little over 3 years.
And I will say that I think that even after a year, we thought it was a long time. Like, we thought we'd been out for a while, or that maybe even we knew things. I'll speak for myself. But in talking to a lot of other people who have left religion, and now that we've been out for 3 years officially, I can already see that I don't know. Like, it is super new. I never thought of it necessarily like that. Like, even like 6 months or 12 months out, I thought like it had been a while. But now talking to other people who have been out for decades, it's a completely different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, and I probably said as much when we hung out I felt like it was toward the end when I actually got that nugget that it was only 2 years or 3 years.
Right.
Because I felt like, oh, you guys are like total noobs to like freedom and life outside the church.
Absolutely.
It does. I saw someone last night actually who I had grown up with in church, and I have a lot of tattoos, and she had a few tattoos, and I knew that she had left more recently than me. And it was funny because she was like, it's been 18 months. And I'm like, that's not very long. Again, like even 3 years, obviously, I'm like, that isn't also very long.
Yeah.
Especially when you think of how many years we were in.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing is because of the programming and because of, I think I'm very sensitive about sort of children and the indoctrination of children.
Yeah.
So regardless of what that indoctrination is, it's tricky. It's tricky with how to raise kids and all this. And we'll get into that later. But we were basically indoctrinated.
Yep.
So when you grow up with that, your first 5, 6, 7 years of life, like it really shapes your mind and your thinking and your personality. And when you come out of it so I was like 30, 31, 32 when I came out, and you are
so that was the same as me.
Yeah.
Like that's about how old I was.
And I was 36, 37.
Yeah. So when you've been in it for so long, it's kind of like you have to start rewiring the neuron connections in your brain.
Yeah.
But it's really hard, and it takes time to undo all that has been done.
Yes.
And I'm further along on that path than you guys, so I think I've kind of been through probably a lot. It's kind of like grief in a way, like going through the phases.
I think it's not just kind of like, I think it is grieving, along with a bunch of other things, but I think it specifically is also grieving. I mean, and you say like it's hard to come out. That's specifically why I started going to therapy, was because I felt, and an accurate thought or an accurate feeling was that there were gaps in my development that I didn't know. That was my concern, is like growing up in a certain way and spending so long in it. What did I miss? Like, where are my gaps? Like
in life experience.
Yeah, in life experience.
Just in general, like what am I missing? What did I miss? And so like I specifically went to therapy so that I could start to kind of pinpoint those things and kind of see the gaps from a third party perspective. And it's been both validating that I am missing things, and also like, hey, you're a 40-year-old man with children. This is a thing that happens to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Like, so it's been kind of both, but
yeah.
So you're able to sort of balance out that feeling of, damn, I missed out. And you get like anger and resentment and bitterness and sadness, but you're able to balance it out because you're like, oh, but I still have a good life and I have things.
Yeah, I think for me, the balance now, and really it's just like, well, only, I don't know how to say this, only now matters. Like, it doesn't, like, yeah, I have a bunch of experience and all these things happen, but as long as the present moment is like what I want it to be, or at least I can appreciate it, enjoy it, be in it, then like I think I'm okay. So I think it's taken me 3 years and longer to kind of get to a place where I feel like, oh, it's fine. Like now there's new things to experience, but I don't necessarily feel, I don't feel like a negative towards the past. Like it's in my time in religion, I don't really feel.
I do. We have very different.
I guess I don't feel like I don't dwell
sense
on
that.
Yeah.
I don't dwell on the past in general. That's not something I think about a bunch. So it's been easy for me to kind of just leave it behind. And I don't say easy. It hasn't been easy, but I'm able to leave it behind and just look towards the future because that's how I am naturally. So I don't feel a lot of sort of like I missed out and feel negative or angry about it. It took me some time, but I feel like I got there pretty quickly.
I did not. Do you want me to just dive right into that?
Go for it.
So my experience being a woman raised in Mormonism with the idea that my whole purpose and existence essentially was to get married and have kids and be a stay-at-home mom. And this is where I was, quote, supposed to find my joy. And then being 28, 29 years old and having 3 kids and being miserable. And I have a lot of sisters, I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and I by no means thought it was going to just be this like super easy, wonderful, every day is a picnic kind of thing. But I also just felt like this was not, like this cannot be all that was supposed to happen for me. And my parents were encouraging of me getting an education. They're highly educated people.
They were or they weren't?
They were.
They were
encouraging. Oh, for sure. And I went to college, but I didn't graduate because I didn't really like it. And I think there's lots of things I've thought over the years of like how I would redo it or how I think I would have excelled, what would have been the most optimal thing for me. And obviously not anyone's situation can be perfect all the way down, but school still isn't something that I think would have been the right path for me. And that's fine. But I couldn't get myself to latch on to any sort of course of study and finish school. And I got married at 19 and was just waiting and like very impatiently waiting for Ben to finish school so that we could start having kids, because that was just all that I knew to do. And it would, and that's what happened. So now here I am, kids are 11, 9, and nearly 6. And it's hard for me to just look forward and say, okay, I can't do anything about the situation from the past. Let's just keep moving forward, because I feel like I have many literal reminders every single day that I feel like I didn't have control over my life and over my choices, that I was programmed to do a certain thing. I did it very, very, very well. And now this other person lived this life, and then I woke up and here I am.
Responsible
for those decisions. And these kids that didn't ask for this, and they didn't know, and I didn't know when I was having them. I didn't know that I was going to be someone, again, like with the optimal situation. How could I have been set up for success? It probably would not have even been to have children. And I'm
like, if you knew then what you know now, and sort of your personal views and
identity, I don't believe I would have had kids. Now, do I have a great benefit from having them? For sure. Do I love them? Absolutely. But I don't know that I would choose to do that again if I could have that do-over. It is not the path that leads me to happiness. So I don't have quite the same positive spin, which is not uncommon for us to have those differences.
Right, I would say that falls right in line with our general relationship and personalities.
Yeah.
I get a sense of that.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there's like that motherly instinct that you feel like it's not really you, or?
Yeah. And I have some friends who have also left Mormonism and have the same number of kids or more. And for a while, I convinced myself that everybody felt like me. And then as I spent more time with them and talked to them specifically about it, I realized that that's not true, that they feel the same sort of frustration, and they blame the Mormon Church in the same way that I do, in that they didn't feel like they had options. They felt the same sort of programming and automation towards getting married and having kids. That tracks with me. We're similar in that, but now they're on the other side of it, and they don't have the same anger and frustration over the current situation.
So it's kind of like their values. We're just talking about women, right?
Yeah.
So like their values individually was they're cool with the motherhood thing and the kids thing, and it aligned with the church. Even though they've left the church, they're fine.
They're still fine with it.
But you were only kind of doing that because it was a church thing.
Yeah, and I didn't know that.
Right.
Even that was completely subconscious.
Right.
Like I had no idea that was the only reason that I was doing it. But so that's been helpful to me, to not feel like every woman who has children is miserable, because there was a while that I was like, oh, this was a scam. We all got duped. None of us wanted to do this. And now I've realized, no, that's not true. It was just me. And there's others like me, but mostly not all of them.
Yeah. I think this is the thing about individuality, is that every person, like, okay, so I was a virgin till 30 because I was doing the church thing and, and waiting till marriage and all that. And once I started having sex in my 30s and left the church and all that stuff, I was like, I still looked at sex as like a two-sided coin. So on the one side is like religion and whatever those values are that are imposed on you. And the other side is just what you as an individual think about sex. Okay. Whether you like it, whether you want to go this way, straight, bi, whatever. Like, that's just your own personal take on sexuality.
Sure.
So the religious side was thrown out for me. But then there was the other side that I just started to figure out for myself for the first time.
Right.
And I'm still trying to figure that out.
Right.
Like, I don't know how, like when you asked earlier on your guys' podcast, like how spiritual of a person I am. Like, I don't know how sexual of a person I am or not. So I go back and forth with like, am I asexual? Am I just too old now? Like, is it the window? Like, I missed my 20s, like that regret of like, damn, like my sexual prime, I just let it go because I was waiting for marriage that never happened.
Right. Interesting.
So there's a lot of just things floating around in my
Right.
head, and I'm like trying to figure it out. But my point is, though, is like it is a highly individual thing.
Right.
And I think when we come out of a programming like religion, it's tough in a way because like, oh shit, like we don't have somebody telling us anymore.
Yep.
Not only like I have to figure this out for myself, but I can figure this out for
Right.
myself.
Right.
And it's like the combination of that is like it's a difficult task.
Yeah.
To figure out for yourself, you know, sexuality, and that's just one example. So it's not
Right.
just sexuality, but
No,
it's like
that's what I was going to say is
career
that
and
it's
meaning,
you go
purpose.
back over every decision and it feels incredibly validating to find those decisions that you're like, oh, I would make that same decision. Even without this set of beliefs and programming, I would still make this choice. And there are millions of people who did not grow up in any sort of religious tradition who choose to have children. This is a decision that people make, but it's not one that I feel like I made because I wanted to make it. I made it just because it was an automatic thing. But yeah, you go back over all these decisions and you're like, would I make this decision now? Or did I just do it because I was told to?
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
you talk about programming, and we often, like a recurring conversation we have is that we call ourselves now, or what we were was Orthodox Mormon. Like we were pretty strict and like followed all the rules. And when we were in the church, we assumed that everyone was trying to do that. Now, some people didn't do that, and we just saw them and thought that they also thought that they were failing at being a good Mormon. But it turns out that it is very individual. Like there's a range of belief, even in, you know, a fundamentalist religion, there's a range of belief. They don't talk about it publicly, but now we know after we've gotten out that people believe all different kinds of things. We just didn't know that because the programming is so good for us that we thought that it was a one size fits all. And like, that's how we lived it. That's how we judged other people.
Yep.
And to some extent that part, like unlearning that, like you talking about, you thought everyone thought the same way you did about motherhood, like unlearning the idea that there are individuals and they're like the range of everything is so large. The only way you can understand it is to talk to another individual, have a long conversation, and then you can understand that person.
But how often did that happen within the Mormon church? Like
Open conversations?
No.
Yeah, I wouldn't think.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
we
yeah.
wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Almost never. I had some incredibly frustrating conversations with one friend who definitely lived Mormonism very, very differently than I did, and
But you never knew about it because you never openly
Well-
talked about it while you were in it.
no, I knew because they were sort of open about the things that they did and didn't do, which was mind-boggling to me, and I didn't understand.
The assumption was that they just weren't doing it good enough, but they would, if they could, they would rather do it better. Like, if that makes
So
sense.
they were aware of the like, yeah, we know we're not the greatest Mormons kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
but
they
the
were, like-
assumption on our part was, but they would like to be better. Always wanting
or
to
at
be
least
the.
they should
Therefore,
want to
it
be
was
better.
okay. You didn't judge them because they were only here instead of here.
Oh, I judged the shit out of
yeah.
them. I mean, judgment was my religion. Let's be very clear. Mormonism does lots of things very well, and that is one in particular.
So, kind of a follow-up question is, I'm genuinely curious what other Mormons were like versus how you were like as Mormons, because, like, I remember something you said in the Latter-Day podcast where you said, whether you were then or now, like, you are a very honest person and very passionate about
Yes.
whatever. And when I heard that, I thought about my sister and I, because we were also very honest and super passionate, I think in a different way than you are. Like, I don't think we ever went around judging other people, but for ourselves, I think we were really hard on ourselves. So we were like, it was very real to us, our faith, in the sense of this is what defines us. This is our values. This is our, and I think my sister had a lot of frustrations and I had a lot of frustrations because I feel like we were in a Christian community where people were just super casual about it. Like, there were other guy friends, they slept around, they had sex before marriage, and like, at the same time, they would, on paper, we'd be like, oh yeah, you're not supposed to have sex before marriage. And I would heed that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So that was my frustrating experience, is that I feel like I'm trying to be like super Christian guy.
Right.
Not in the sense of lording it over other people, but for the sense of like, this is my faith. This is what I believe. So I'm going to stick to it. These are my values. But it was frustrating living amongst other Christians who were kind of like, whatever.
Right.
They're Christian. They tick the box. Like, we can date, we can screw, we can whatever.
And you don't feel like you were judging them?
Well, I feel like it was unfair.
Yeah.
Because they got to do whatever they want. Why
Yes.
am I having to live to a higher standard?
Right.
When I say I'm not judging them, I didn't wag my finger at them. Like I didn't.
Oh, I didn't either.
Okay.
It was all internal. I didn't, or with me and Ben, I wasn't saying things to people.
Okay.
But I remember, so I was very much like you and your sister, the way you described. Like, I thought that was unfair. I had friends who drank in high school, and that was super frustrating to me. And when I went to college, the one year that I was at Utah State, I lived in an apartment with 5 other girls, and all of them were Mormon. And we had church 9:00 Sunday morning or whatever. And I was the only one that got up and went. And nobody else got up and went. And I was super confused and did not understand why they weren't going to church. Like, how come I'm getting up and going and you're not? Like, where's this disconnect of you not thinking that this is required of you to do too?
And did you externalize it or internalize it? And when I say externalize it, I mean kind of wag your finger at them, or did you just feel like this sucks?
I don't think
this isn't fair?
I don't think I said it. I probably and especially at that time in my life, right? I'm like 18 years old, so I'm sure I passive aggressively was a total bitch at some point to them about it. But I was not that kind of a person. Like, have you ever seen the movie Saved?
I am filled with Christ.
I am filled with God's love. Yes. That is one of my favorite quotes.
Yeah.
And my friends and I say it all the time. Like, anytime I just go down a super rabbit hole because I still, like, I describe it as it is a coin. I was on one side of the coin and I just flipped to the other side. So I can be just as adamant now, having left. And I'll say that I am filled with God's love. But so I was internalizing it, and I was hard on myself, but then could make myself feel better pretty easily because I was like, well, I'm being a way better Mormon than these people are being.
God will reward me for this, maybe, like in the next life.
I wonder if I thought I was getting. I guess I probably did. What about you, Ben?
I have such a hard time remembering what I thought anymore. Because, like,
it's all a foggy blur.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I don't know what, like, how I saw people. I think I definitely internalized it. Like, I was more interested in my own personal sins and things that I was doing wrong. I'm sure I saw other people doing it.
So you were focused on the plank in your eye, not the speck in your brother's eye.
I was a very
good for you, man.
I was a very good Christian, if you can call Mormons that.
You can't, but if you could, you were.
Right. I think I was way more concerned about the things that I was doing or wasn't doing or trying to. And I think I'm generally that way today, even now, like more. I mean, I'm an introvert. Like I'm more internalized in general. So I don't think I really I don't think I really cared what other people were doing. When we got married, obviously there was a lot more discussion between the two of us about what other people were doing. So I think I naturally latched onto that. And I wouldn't say that, like, I would ever have thought it wasn't fair that other people were doing it. I would just say what they're doing is wrong.
Yeah. By the time we got married, that's how I viewed things.
Oh, and a very classic, like, people gossip because it makes them feel better about themselves. Like, that's what I feel like we were doing. That, like, it makes you feel better about how you're performing because you're doing this, this, and this, and this person isn't doing this.
If you were to allow yourself to gossip in that way, do you feel like that's how you would feel?
And there's always like what they, they're having worldly and earthly joy or whatever, but this isn't going to lead to like eternal happiness for them. Like they'll regret these decisions and they'll wish that they had been more faithful and more righteous and whatever. Like I definitely felt that way. Like in high school, it was jealous. By adulthood, I wasn't jealous of them. I just made myself think, well, they won't be happy. This isn't going to lead them where they want to go.
And it's crazy, like all
and
these
it absolutely
rationalizations.
was going to lead them where they wanted to go because that's where they wanted to go.
But it's so reaffirming to, I mean, this is not to get into proselytizing, but like it's reaffirming to make yourself feel like the decisions you are making are going to lead to a better thing, right? So you continuously reaffirm that through various methods, and one of those is judging others by saying, well, they're not going to be as happy, I will be happier. And someone said to me recently about proselytizing, the reason people share and want other people to be Christian, Mormon, whatever the thing, is because it reaffirms your own beliefs. Like, hey, I get someone else to do it, that means they believe it, that means that what I'm believing is true, or whatever thing. Yeah, I mean, we're all just trying to protect our space, right, and how we feel about ourselves. So I think
it's kind of like if more people are on your team too, that means like,
yes.
oh, our team's winning.
Yeah,
right.
We must be right because look at all these people that are over here on our side, for sure. And most of our friends, like after we got married in the decade of adulthood, if you want to even call it that we were still Mormon. Most of our friends they were like us. They went to church every single week just like we did, and we went to the Mormon temple and we did all the things. So by that point, they were all just like us. And yeah, just all being self-righteous pricks.
I am filled with Christ's love. God.
maybe we didn't talk. You don't talk about that too much in public society in Mormonism, right? I mean, you do, but it's always from like this, like, how can we help this person? You know, like that perspective, like, oh, they're not coming to church enough, or they're not volunteering enough, or whatever the thing they're not doing enough of.
So you would gently approach them in that way?
So it always floats up to like a leadership level, like where like you have group leadership meetings, like the leadership of the congregation get together and discuss the families in the congregation and how you can help them. And so it's always done from quote love. And I mean, it just really comes down to like wanting other people to help out as much as you're helping out.
It almost kind of reminds me of Office Space, where he's like,
okay, but some people choose to wear more, and we encourage that. Okay?
Yeah.
Some of us choose to wear more, and that's kind of encouraged.
Definitely passive aggressive.
Oh, yeah.
And I think everybody prefers that because the aggressive is always so ugly.
Right.
I am filled with Christ's love. God.
And it gets to the point where you're like, that's not really Christian to be that way. So I think passive aggressive is...
Don't actually throw the Bible at them, literally.
Right, Mandy Moore. Don't. But yeah, I mean, we were talked about in those kinds of meetings on our way out. How can we help the Edgels?
Oh, yeah.
And we had a friend who was like sort of our little mole in these meetings, and his line was, "They don't need any help. They're fine." But no one believed that. It was like, no, they're not coming to church. They must need help. How can we help them? And he's like, they don't need any help. They're fine.
Is that friend still in the church, or is he out?
He goes, but he doesn't believe at all. That's the appropriate face. I wish everyone could see the face you just made.
It's just this why.
It's so complex, though, when there's family involved. I agree.
I get it.
For me, having made the decision, and like, it's generally been okay, right? Like, things have been good in life still. Some people don't have that experience. We were talking last night to some people who are still people are still amazed that we are still married, because that
was the miracle when you and I first talked a couple months ago, is that you both came out of it together.
Yeah, so I talked to two sisters, and they both have gotten divorced since leaving the church, and they looked at me and they're like, "We're both divorced." And then they pointed at me, and I was like, "Ben's there. We're still married." They were like, "What?
But did they get divorced because only one of them left?
Yes.
Religion? Right.
I mean, in many cases, people that both leave also get divorced. So, like,
really?
Yes. Like, people.
Again, it's back to the decision thing.
I would think that would be such a shared experience.
It is, but then you get to go back over all of the decisions that you've made. And I know so many couples that it was like they had so much pressure to get married that they just basically found someone that checked all the boxes and they got married, and they didn't have anything in common, or they don't have anything in common now. They didn't grow together. They were never friends, whatever it is. So as you're going through this inventory of all the decisions you've made, you're like, well, this isn't one that I would make again.
Wow, okay.
And they don't stay together.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like they finally have the green light, the okay to just go their own way. And
we just think we don't know what the universe has in store. We think maybe this is some sort of joke that we've made it out together, that there's going to be some other like anvil that will fall from the sky at some other point, because it doesn't, it's weird. It's luck. We didn't do anything.
At this point, I do want to give us credit for like
codependency. Yeah, that's super.
Well, right. It does come naturally to us to be hyper communicative, and it is natural. Like we were always friends first. Like we were always friends. So like we have that going for us, and that continues to work. But we also continue to work at our relationship.
We do.
It's not, and I think even more so now, less taking it for granted, because we're continuing to choose monogamy with each other. And I hate to say that as in only ever having been monogamous, because it's not that valid.
Doesn't count.
But we like to reassure ourselves with that as we go along. So
Yeah.
Who knows what's next? But I mean, I think that we've built something and we're continuing to build it. So for now, it works.
Yep.
Okay, which is a great segue into my next question, which is kind of a series of questions. But I was thinking about this week as I was kind of, researching and brainstorming about this talk. And I was like, essentially all you guys have known is married life in your adult life. And all I've known is single life in my adult life. So factoring that in, I'm curious there's a lot of different ways you could answer this. So one of the ways I was going to ask it is just in general, like sort of why do we do what we do? Why is it important to us? Why dress a certain way? Why act a certain way? Because I can answer these questions in terms of a single person. For me, even back in my 20s when I was a Christian or whatever, like just as a single person, I essentially was just on that track of making myself into a catch, right? So like I want to be with a high quality woman, I have to be high quality myself. So, and I think this is the motivating factor for a lot of men, straight men in America is you want to be the best man in order to get a great girl. So I was kind of on that track. And then when I look back, I think that was a lot of my motivating factors, right? So I'm kind of like, you guys don't know anything about Tinder and the dating apps. And
We learned a little bit about it last night.
just this whole evolution, because
Right.
before Tinder, there was like OkCupid and dating sites and other things. So I've been through that whole thing.
Sure.
So I kind of know what that experience is like in terms of religion and coming out of it and what motivates me. But I'm curious about you guys. Like, you can feel free to answer this in any way you want to answer it, but whether you want to talk about religion or not, or leaving Mormonism, but like kind of what motivates you individually and as parents and as a married couple.
Do you want to go first? Or do you want me to go first?
If you're ready, go.
So motherhood, I think it's funny that this is my answer, but it kind of is because I have a unique outlook as far as this isn't what I would choose again to be doing. And so Ben and I are both one of 7 kids. I'm the youngest of 7 kids. And any number of children and any birth order is going to impact the person, right? I feel like I'm particularly attached to the fact that I'm the youngest of 7 kids. And that was a very big identifier for me. So I have looked at how I was treated by my siblings and how I was treated by my parents, and for good and bad within Mormonism, like what you want to attach to that and attribute to that. So now here I am in my 30s with 3 kids, and I've gotten to rethink why I teach them the things that I teach them, the way that I teach them, the way that I talk to them, and the kind of example that I want to give to them and model that I would like to be for them. So that is that's a really big thing for me that informs it. And like, I thought of it because you said how you dress. Like, I have tattoos. I dress a little bit different than the other suburban moms where we live. I have some ridiculous hair. But part of that is because I want my kids to know that I am a person, that I'm not just their mom, that I have an identity that exists outside of being a mom. And that wasn't something that was modeled for me by my mother or by any of my Mormon friends' moms. None of my friends' moms worked. They all were just stay-at-home moms of a billion kids. So I want my kids to see that I am a person and have my own individuality, and that they can have their own individuality. I want them to feel way freer than, I mean, there's swings in society, right? But like, there's a certain part that wants them to be this perfect little thing in a box, and I want them to feel like they don't have to be that way if that's not what suits them, that's just not an expectation that's held in our house or by me specifically. So that informs a lot of how I go through my like daily decisions, I think.
For me, what motivates me? So I think that in growing up, I both naturally and by nurture, I was very much a member of a team, community. Like that's kind of what I saw myself as. And I don't, so there's 2 parts of this. Like, both on one side, I want everyone to get along. Like I want to be part of the team, the community.
Aren't you like the peacemaker?
Right.
Yes,
That's my
yes.
Enneagram type. And
This is not a podcast about the
Not that this
Enneagram.
is a podcast about the Enneagram.
I fully identify with that, and for the longest time thought that was a really good thing. And I still think that there is definitely positives to that. So asking a question about the individual and me as an individual, I don't think that I ever thought of that until recently, like the last few years.
Like what motivates you, or why are you doing what you do? And
Yeah, it was always like just achieving the thing. Like right, there was a standard that I needed to live by. You know, when it was Mormonism, it was the Mormonism standard. And as leaving Mormonism, I don't know, I've hopped around to different standards that I'm trying to live by. It's just been seriously in the last 6 months to a year with Enneagram work and therapy in talking about me, what I want, who I am, who am I, and actually asking myself that question. I think I've come to the conclusion that that question doesn't matter, other than that I'm not going to, I guess the question doesn't matter because I'm never going to figure that out. Like there's never going to be like this
it's
is exactly.
not like you arrived at the answer to the question and that's it.
Yeah,
Forever.
right. Like, oh, here I am. Like, and I think previous to learning that there was no answer, I thought there was an answer, only because previously I was a member of community. That was the answer. Like that was what everything was kind of geared towards. And then I was married, even after Mormonism, I was still married, and like we were a team, like we were together, like we did everything together. And it's just been in the last little bit that I've said, well, okay, I don't necessarily know who I am, but my motivating factor now is just, I don't know, the erotic, to go back to the, like what, and maybe, I don't know if I defined it on your podcast, maybe I should.
Everyone should go listen to the Your Friends podcast and
That is a teaser right there.
listen about the erotic.
But like just looking for the wonder, the mystery, like the unknown, just continuing to kind of wander and wonder, like just kind of feel my way around. And I think that's where I feel most comfortable, and that's what I like the most. And so I don't know if that it describes a motivation for me, other than that I am motivated by novelty, newness, learning things,
Exploration, curiosity,
right,
knowledge.
right. That's who I think this current iteration of myself is, and that's what I feel comfortable doing. So it's almost like an anti-motivation. Like I have to kind of restrict myself from setting a standard and then trying to meet it and then failing. Like I have a lot of that because of religion. And so the thing for me right now that's motivating is not worrying about that and just kind of seeing how things go and being comfortable and just kind of wandering around. And I like that. And when I'm able to do that, when I'm able to align, I feel like that's when I feel best. So I don't know if that's an answer, but that's how I feel.
I feel similarly. Like my motivating factors have changed in terms of, I feel like a lot of what you're talking about too is like, it's like being on a track for both of you. Like you're being on a track and you're just, you're on that path, and that's the path that everybody's on, and you just do that. That's life. And we've stepped off of that track, and it's scary, but at the same time, it can be a lot more fulfilling if we can kind of figure it out.
Right.
And it's a process of joy and frustration and setbacks, figuring out who you are and what you want out of life. But I feel like this is the necessary path for each of us. And it's a shame in a way that it's only so late in life that we're starting that journey in a way. But it's good that we're on that path of self-discovery. And
right. And for me, I think figuring out that like the setbacks are that's part of the path, and not like a failure of any kind. It's just like,
it's not a flaw, it's a feature.
Right. You cycle through, like you do the things and you do them over. Like I've been listening to a lot of Alan Watts lately, which will send you into a place. But like he said, like the apple tree apples, the earth peoples, and now I've gotten to saying like, well, I'm Benning. Like that's just what makes sense to me now. It's like I'm just doing the thing that I do. I don't know how long that'll last, but that's the exciting thing, I think, is that being okay with the setbacks and taking a lot of pleasure in the joy and the exhilaration of doing new things and finding my own path.
Yeah. Totally. Cool. Yeah. Another little follow-up question is, so my sister and I were talking about this and Christianity that her and I grew up with versus Mormonism. And she said to me, like, I think Mormonism is way more of a cult than what we had.
I believe it.
And I was like, yeah, I think I agree. It probably was. So I'm curious, like, because I don't know a ton about Mormonism, but, are there things about it that you feel like have stuck with you that are influencing, that continue to influence, like, kind of remnants of who you are and carrying forward? Like, things that you're actively trying to deprogram, or maybe things that you're not aware of that are...
So the judgment for me is big. I think there's so much of a us versus them that, I mean, at any point in my life, if you would have asked me to tell you 3 things about, like, as a kid, for instance, tell us 3 interesting facts about you. It was like, I'm the youngest of 7, I'm Mormon, and I do gymnastics or something. Like, these would have been my identifiers. And they consider themselves to be like a chosen peculiar people. That's what Mormons call themselves. And they think that they have the one true. I mean, I obviously have come to discover that everybody thinks that about
every
their
religion
own
is the one true
religion.
Some are more
right.
expansive than others.
Sure.
Mormonism is pretty narrow about
It's
what
extremely
the one true is.
specific. And so
Wait. So do Mormons think that Catholics and other Christians are going to hell?
Oh yeah, no. Well,
Not
they're
hell.
not. They're not going to the highest level of heaven.
Okay.
Because there's levels to
Okay.
this.
So we're going to some different planet or
Yep.
something, but
Yep.
we're not going to be like burning in hell or something.
No,
No,
not
you
burning
won't
in
make it to
hell.
the highest either.
Okay.
But you just can't. So I definitely, like, not only was I different, I was better than people. So and I naturally, my personality really likes to be special and different and unique. And so it fed right into that. And I didn't live in Utah, so I was special and unique because there weren't a lot of other Mormons. And so that's how I was able to sort of make it work in my head, is that I was still getting this validation and not praise, but sometimes praise, for being different, for being special. So I am constantly trying to reprogram myself from categorizing
But that must have been
people
tough,
that way.
right? Because what made you special? Because the only of the things that you listed was gymnastics, right? Like other thing else is just kind of predefined for you, right?
Well, but like not everyone. Well, like I said, living here. So I grew up in Northern Virginia, where except for my other Mormon friends, nobody was part of a big family. And nobody was even religious, probably. So those just seemed, they were special. And within Mormonism, it was like I could be special there because of how so I'm an extrovert, which Mormonism loves and rewards extroversion because you want to lead. And
Even the women?
Yes, because now we can't lead over men.
Mm-hmm. But you could lead Bible studies for children or something. But I could lead,
I could do, and I have used this in my life outside of religion, I am really good with teenagers. So I was able to lead these groups of teenagers, and then I would have parents that would come up to me and thank me for the role I was, like this positive influence that I was playing in their teenage daughter's life or whatever it was. So I was getting validation there from just being young, being well-spoken, and being outgoing and extroverted, and like I had a command of the situation, which is not always common for a 21, 22-year-old or however old I was when I was leading these groups. So I was getting it there. But yeah, constantly just like, how can I be, it fosters how can I be better than everybody else? How can I do Mormonism better than everybody else? And that's why people have so many kids, because they wanted...
You're trying to one-up each other?
Oh, yes. You birth your freaking way into heaven. And I had 3 kids and was like, I can't... Like, I thought 3 kids... When I... Like, my friends who only had 3 kids, I looked down on them big time. Like, that's not enough children. That's not, like...
Wait, you looked down on them?
Yes.
But you
Well, because I wasn't done yet. So, like, I was planning on having more
We were gonna
kids.
still have more than them.
We were going to have more kids. And so when I had, like, friends that were maybe, like, a few years older than me who were done, they were like, we have 3 and we're done. I was like, that's not enough kids. You have to have more kids than that. I know.
And
I am not proud of any of this. It was terrible, and I've said a lot of apologies.
God forbid if they only have 1 or 2. Like,
Oh, they must have had fertility issues. I legitimately did not think that there was a single Mormon woman on the earth who chose to only have 1 or 2 kids.
yeah.
If she did, there was something wrong. Like, she didn't get the memo.
Huh.
Like, yeah, it's bananas. This is where the cult mentality comes
Yeah,
in.
I know.
Big time. So I'm trying to reprogramming the fact that I'm not better than other people. I'm just a person. And everybody else is just a person.
My reprogram, I think I have a lot of negative self-chatter. Like, going back to the, like, I have 2 things, and they're kind of combined. Goal setting, like a standard, and going towards it, and like being meticulous and like tracking how well I'm doing against something, and inevitably failing, and then, by the way, having a lot of negative self-talk because I'm not meeting those goals. I think that is what I have been and am currently like working on. Like, I this is kind of weird because I just think I realized this the other day. Like, in the morning, like taking a shower every day, I'd be like, oh, well, I did this thing, yet like I ate this thing yesterday, or I didn't exercise yesterday, and like, or I didn't meditate yesterday. So like, I would just have like constantly going through the checklist of things I was, even after Mormonism, like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing all these things, and like, oh man, I didn't do them yesterday, and like starting to like feel bad about it, and like putting myself in a very negative place. And so now, like, I'm at least noticing that and saying, hey, it's fine. You're doing what you do. Like, this is good. You forgot to do that. Now you can do it again and feel how good it feels to do this thing again, or whatever other talk. But that, like, is a very conscious reprogramming of just my self chatter and talk in my head. I think that's probably the thing that I've held on to that I'm still trying to reprogram. I mean, I'm sure there'll be other things.
Do you ascribe that kind of to Mormonism, or is that just like a you thing?
Oh, I'm sure it's both. Like, I feel like any controlling organization will take the worst of you and pit it against you, and take the best of you and mute it or use it to their advantage.
Yep.
And that's really what I'm seeing. Like, I'm a peacemaker. Like, I'm really good at bringing people together, and this is what I do well. But the way it was turned is that I completely forgot about myself, or was able to like express myself, I guess. And so. But that's good in that sense. Like, I'm an introvert, so I always had a very hard time with Mormonism in that, like, the alpha male leader was the goal. Like, that's what you were supposed to be. And I was in some leadership positions, but it never felt natural to me, and I didn't like it. But I'm a really good, like, number 2. Like, I'm good at, like, getting the group together, sort of like helping people point to the leader. Like that's something that I'm actually good at. But I do feel like it was used for ill because, like, I'm sort of like, because I am so likable with people, like I'm sort of like a spy among the lay people, like pushing them towards the leader. It's kind of weird stuff that like kind of goes through my head now about like my natural abilities and how I kind of use them in that environment. Yeah.
I'm with you on the negative self-talk. Like, I've just been terrible about that over the years, and I think you and I have chatted a little bit on Instagram, and some of my Confusianity posts are like, anything good that you do or anything like, that's God.
Yep.
Every time you fuck up, that's you.
Yep. And
it just like, I don't know how that's not a recipe for making people feel miserable. And I think either my analysis of it is that people just didn't think that deeply about it in Christian church, where they're just like, whatever. But my sister and I would take that kind of stuff very deeply.
Oh, yeah.
And feel really shitty about ourselves.
Yeah.
And, we're not good enough. We're never, and
so the way to feel, this is where I was different. It was, I would feel shitty about myself, and then I would just judge someone who was doing worse than me, and then I would feel okay.
pick yourself up.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. So that's happening a lot
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
Like,
No, I just mean like for a lot of people, like you said, you and your sister felt really badly and you didn't think that other people were. Well, it's because they were either judging other people and making themselves feel better, which I think happens all the time, or maybe they really just weren't thinking about it that seriously.
Yeah.
But, and I'm interested in why particular people, and all of us are included in this, like why was it so ingrained? Like why did that make sense for us so much?
I attribute it to the whole childhood, like, because it was just ingrained in us at a young age, that in our family and our network and our identity.
But like he's got a sister, for instance. She was raised in the same family as him. And by the time she was like 17, 18, she was like, this isn't.
I think you should be careful about saying the same family as me.
Okay, that's
because
fair.
it's not the same family. I grew up with a mom and a dad, and in the upper part of the
fair.
siblings, she grew up with, at least in her formative teenage years, without a dad, and so like that. It's a very much a different dynamic. Okay. I'm not saying that she wouldn't have turned out a different way, but I just think it's
there are other mitigating factors.
Getting to like, because I think what we're talking about all this here is nuance and the individual. Yeah. Like I think everyone's experience is different, especially when there's big changes in the environment.
Yeah.
Again, not that she is a different kind of person, and I don't know if it's all environment or if it's her nature, but. She could have turned out the same way anyway, and it seems like she would have, because she's just a beautifully different person.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I don't mean to derail us on that.
No.
But I like to get into the details, because I think that's what's most interesting about human beings, is that we all have a completely different experience. Like it's just, and it's almost. I mean, this is why art is so important, right? To try to express the unexpressible in a way that other people can can at least interpret in their own way. Anyway.
Yeah, I was when we're talking about like why did we stay in it for so long? Like why didn't we snap out of it? And I was like, but this is the nature of a cult, and the nature of religion is it's reinforced in my skull every week.
Yes.
And you read the verses, suffering. Blessed are the suffering and the poor. And I'm like, oh, I'm suffering. I'm miserable. Oh, but that's a good thing.
Right.
Yeah. And you just into that loop every week for your teens, for your 20s. Yeah. Like, it's just, when you put it like that and you put it all together, it's like, of course it's not going to be easy for us to walk away.
Right.
Well, it's a miracle the other way. Like, how did you get out? How did it happen?
Yeah, I mean, for us.
And I think that was interesting when you were saying earlier about how you were miserable as the mother. And you were like, and I find it interesting because it's like, we almost kind of left for the same kind of reason, except it was the inverse.
Right.
I was miserable as a single person wanting to be married. You were miserable as a mother of 3.
Yeah.
But the point is, we were steeped in religion and we were miserable. And it was, I don't know if it felt like a rock bottom for you, but it felt like a rock bottom for me.
I would say that it did. And I like to hold 2 different things as true. I was miserable, and I also for sure had postpartum depression. So my still believing and very religious family, I think, wants to explain it away like that it's unfortunate that I didn't just make it through that tough time. Because it was
Did
really...
Did you only feel that after the 3rd child? Or was it like...
I mean, to varying degrees after each one. It's not easy, and you're super sleep deprived, and it's terrible with pockets of joy. But it got worse, I think, with every single one, and also because then you have more children to take care of. Yeah. So I think I definitely have family and probably friends even that wish that I could have just, waited it out, powered through, whatever. That I didn't need to make such a drastic life change because of that. Well, both things are true. Like I believe I had postpartum, and I also believe that then I found out that the church wasn't true and I needed to leave. Like both things are true.
Yeah.
So here's a question I have for you so we have talked a lot about mental health and been very open in our marriage about that, but I don't think we were talking about postpartum depression then.
No.
Maybe in severe cases of other people where like drastic things have happened, but I don't think we were talking about it in our marriage, especially after having kids, even though it was definitely happening, and I think it happens more often than any of us realize. I wonder if you had identified it as postpartum and then gone and been medicated or something, like you'd taken steps to kind of dull it a little bit, if that would have change your trajectory.
Maybe, except for that our path to unbelief and out of the church, they sort of like weaved in and out of each other. We were going at the same speed, but sort of on different paths. And so even if I hadn't had my own first step, which was being miserable at home with 3 little kids, you still would have come home and told me whatever it was you came home and told me. And then that, I think, would have set me on it. So I don't know that, like, motherhood was that first domino that fell, but I think I still would have, because again, ultimately it didn't come down to the fact that, oh, Mormonism is making me be a mom, I have to leave Mormonism so that I don't have to be a mom anymore. It was, this isn't true. Yeah. Why am I living my life this way?
Yeah, like how quickly did you, how quickly were you able to arrive at, it doesn't matter because none of it's true anyway, so like I can do what I want. Like what was the gap between the first feeling and then arriving at that final place where you could say, well, that's fine, even if, A, B, and C are still in place. At the end of the day, this is not true, so I can do what I want.
So this made me, I have a friend who is 36, and she is single. She's never been married. And she left the church about 5 years ago. And the reason that she left the church is she went and she looked around. She was not miserable being single. She was being told that she should be miserable because she was single. Yeah. And she was looking around at all of the mothers with their little kids and thought, they're all miserable. I'm actually not miserable, and everyone thinks I am, and they're all pitying me, and they think that I should feel terrible. I actually am totally okay, but you know who is super sad is all these women that are following the path, and she's like, I gotta get out of here.
Wow.
And that's what led her to leave. Yeah. She was like, that's not, their answer's wrong. They got it backwards.
I would like to give a general plug for being a parent of small children, specifically a mother, being very difficult.
It's so hard.
Regardless of your situation, regardless of your affiliation, parenting small children is a difficult time of life.
It's not joyous for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, they're little animals. Yeah.
Tyrants.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was, it's funny you say that about your friend. Is she still single and whatever, doing her thing? Yeah. So I felt a little bit, I didn't used to feel that way when I was in the I felt, I bought into the whole miserable thing as a single person because I was incomplete.
Yeah.
So I bought into all that, and every week it was preached to me, and I was miserable and lonely. But now I'm probably more where your friend is back then, but now I'm there where I'm like, I went out for July 4th. My mom and sister came up to visit in Philly, and I'm an introvert. It's a hot, muggy day out. I'm like, we got this. I have a really great place. Like, let's just watch a movie and let's watch them. This Is Us. Let's hang out, have a good conversation. But my sister noted the firework options or whatever, and there was Meghan Trainor was going to be, and my mom was like, oh, Meghan Trainor. and my sister and I are like, because my mom, I'm not going to get into her situation. That's a whole podcast episode, but
I mean, she's a woman. How old is your mother? Probably,
65.
Okay, and she knows who Meghan Trainor is and wants to go see her. Yeah. So I can imagine that that's a whole podcast episode.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, the thing is my mom has lived a very sacrificial life.
Sure.
And my sister and I both know that. And any time we have a little opportunity, because my mom never asks for anything, right. She just sucks it up and suffers and all of that.
Women of a certain age and religion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a little opportunity where I'm like, hey, this is something that might make my mom let's go to that thing. And my sister and I, we didn't even say it. We both just knew.
Aww,
let's go. Good. So we went and we did that thing. And it was honestly lame. Lame as fuck. And even when all was said and done and we talked about it with my mom, she was like, yeah, it was kind of lame.
Aww, but you did it.
But she's glad. She knew that I didn't really want to do it.
Right.
And she was like, but I'm glad you went along with it.
Yes.
And you didn't complain and fuss, because that's what my dad would do. Oh. He would make my mom miserable because he would just complain the whole time.
Sure.
And she was glad that we did it. And so I was happy for that.
Yeah.
But I also texted Jose at the same time I was there. I was like, dude, I'm so glad I'm not married with kids. And because I live such a life, like a
Yes.
sweet life where every day I wake up now and I do whatever the hell I want to do. And it's
Yeah.
freaking awesome.
Tell me more about it. It
And,
sounds like
yeah.
a dream.
This is serious.
I
This is
talk with
seriously.
Brian
We're talking
about
about
this all the
eroticism.
time.
Like,
Yeah,
tell us
yeah.
more about this single life.
Please never stop
Right.
telling me about this fantasy I have.
This is your new porn. A podcast about the single life.
Yeah.
I look up apartments way more often than you would know.
What is it like to drink a cup of coffee by yourself?
Yeah. But it occurred to me, I was looking at all these families and couples and people around, and I'm like, I used to be so jealous of all
Right.
that. Just, and now I'm like, I'm so glad I'm not married with kids, because I was in an environment where I was grossed out, I was sticky, it was loud, it was like a crappy view of this digital screen of Meghan Trainor, who I don't even care about over there, and it's like the fireworks were totally lame. It was like the lamest fireworks show. It was like, and then we couldn't get an Uber. And we had to walk through, like, there's some sketchy neighborhoods in Philly.
Yeah.
And I'm like with my 65-year-old mom and my sister and me. And we're walking through these sketchy neighborhoods for like, I don't know, like 2 miles. We probably walked like 4 miles. So I'm like stressed.
Yeah.
I'm worried about my mom. I'm worried about if some thug jumps out with a gun or a knife. And I'm like, I'm going to be the one who has to protect my mom and sister.
Right.
And I'm not like BJJ guy, like our AOC friend. So but I'm going to have to do the best I can, So I'm like, I'm stressed out, and I'm like, I just want to hurry up and get there, get back home safe. So the whole thing about it, but I'm just overcome with that feeling of like, thank God, or,
Yeah.
that I don't have to do this all the time.
Yeah.
Like I can make an allowance for this one day or whatever.
Right.
But
Right.
I'm like, if I were married with kids, I would constantly be doing things I don't want to do.
That is what being a parent is constantly doing things
Yeah.
that you don't want to do.
Or, as we discussed earlier, not doing things you don't want to do, and then feeling like kind of guilty about like being selfish because going to the fireworks in the hot weather is going to be shitty, and you don't want to do it, so you don't do it. But then you're like, well, I should take my kids to see fireworks, right? So like, not only do you have to, if
You can't
if you
win.
do
No,
the thing,
you
it's
can't
terrible.
win.
If you
Yeah.
don't do the thing, you
Yeah.
feel a certain way about it. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah. But I'd like to go just like, what a beautiful moment that you get to sacrifice or whatever for your mom, and she knows, but it's sort of unspoken. I just really like that
Me too.
idea of you getting to do this thing for someone. I mean, and that's what life's about in general, right?
Yeah.
Like, is doing something for someone, not because you have to, but because you want to, and them kind of knowing where your heart is in
in
it,
the
where
right
it's coming
place.
from. I think that's beautiful.
That is beautiful.
All right, what do we got here? All right, how do I transition into this? So, there's a lot of parallels with our stories, and there's a lot of similarities and stuff. At the same time, there's a lot of differences. And I feel like as two people or three people who've come out of religion, it's different for each of us. And how we go about that individual journey is different amongst all three of us. But I noticed, like, on social media, like, things I see you post, and like I'm always like a little bit veiled about certain views I have, because
Sure.
in the society that we live in now, I feel like I'm not allowed to say certain things.
Okay.
And even with this podcast, and I feel like I don't believe in religion and God and things like that anymore. But if there's any principle I believe in now, it's free speech.
Okay.
Because, like, I might have said on you guys' podcast, like, or maybe it was in the car, like, I'm a very skeptical person, and I'm very skeptical of power and institutions and
Sure.
any kind of body of, whether it's the government, whether it's the church. Like, after everything I've been through, I'm very skeptical, and I'm very, like, untrusting of any sort of institution or cult-like mentality, which is why I'm very much an individual, and I don't very easily join a group
Right.
or a movement of any sort, which is kind of a lot of what Confusianity is about. Is like I'm basically bringing in a number of different viewpoints, and I kind of absorb things, but at the same time, I take in information and I allow it to influence what I believe and what I think. But ultimately, it's kind of my decision to sort of decide, like, what direction I want to run with it.
Right.
So I wanted to talk with you about kind of this whole social justice movement, because it worries me Like it stresses me out. It concerns me.
In what way?
Yeah.
Like why?
Well, because again, if my core principle is freedom of speech,
Okay.
and I feel like that is being curtailed and I'm not allowed to say things, that's why it stresses me out.
Who is curtailing it?
It's this movement, and I'll
just people.
Yeah, but I'll get into specific examples.
I love specific examples. They're my favorite.
So, and maybe this is a good way to start it out because we both have a shared interest in Crashing,
Yeah.
the show. So I loved that show.
It's great.
You guys love it.
Love it.
But I want to bring up like the specific moment and episode where they're performing on college campuses. And there's that whole like PC, like you're not allowed to broach certain subjects.
Right.
You're not allowed to. And I'm watching it and I'm like, I like Pete Holmes, but I love the show, but it's not because I like his comedy. Like
Okay.
I watched the show and it wasn't a lot of the stand-up comedy bits that made me laugh.
Right.
It was the real life
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
that made me laugh.
Yeah.
And specifically about coming out of religion and
Yeah.
those things. But I think to the moment where he's towing the line and like doing what he's supposed to do, and he gets the gig and he gets the money and he gets because he's going
playing the
according
part,
to the
right.
program. Whereas she is like, fuck it, like I'm gonna say what I want to do and be like do my material.
Right.
And she gets punished for it and shut down and ostracized and all that. And this is kind of what I'm talking about, is that I feel like we're starting to live, I don't want to say starting to, it's like we're living in this society now where you just can't say certain things. You have to stick within this, safe space, kind of non-triggering language and values.
Well, you don't have to. You don't have to stay in that space.
Well, you don't, but the consequences you will pay of being deplatformed, of being banned, of being, that's what, like, so I sent a couple links, and the third link I think was a girl who was banned from Twitter recently because she got into a back and forth with a trans woman, and you're not allowed to do that, and she got banned.
Well, what'd she say? I mean, because having a back and forth with the trans person, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. But I think the trans, it got into sort of a name calling back and forth thing. And I think this girl has some kind of reproductive condition or something with her uterus. And the trans woman was calling that out and insulting her about it. And I'm sure that triggered her in a lot of ways. And she fired back with like, basically referring, he's overweight or she's overweight. So she was like, you fat, ugly man or whatever. So that was enough to get her banned. And I think she even deleted the tweets because maybe she felt bad about it when she calmed down later, but it was too late. She's already banned. So this is just an example. And I'm like, the thing that concerns me is that there's also the Islam thing, right? So like, now we're reaching a point where you're not allowed to say anything bad about Islam because all of a sudden you're labeled Islamophobic. And I don't talk a lot about Islam in Confusianity, but that's partially because I don't know a lot about it. Right. And I recently bought a Quran specifically for the reason of like knowing what's in the book.
Sure.
So that I can legitimately critique it and whatnot.
The way that you are the Bible and whatever else.
I mean, the Bible I already know inside out, so I can tear the hell out of that, but I can't do that with the Quran.
Right.
So, but my sister told me, like, oh, don't even bother, because it's just going to upset you in the same way the Bible does. And not only that, you're not going to be allowed to speak about it, or there'll be like death threats on your life.
Interesting.
So, but there's a lot of, I mean, there's the Islam thing, there's the trans thing, there's all kinds of things. And it worries me because I feel like what's happening on college campuses and people being demonized for having views that are outside of the agenda as being, this is the thing. I feel like the term Nazi it no longer has a meaning anymore because they've literally accused Ben Shapiro, who's a Jew, of being a Nazi. Sure. And when that happens, the term Nazi, but it's being thrown around. Right. But then when you look at it that way, but then there's the whole punch a Nazi thing.
Right.
That at first everybody's on board. Like, sure, like there's a certain pleasure you get.
Right.
And I got pleasure out of seeing that Nazi punched in the head.
Right.
Sure.
But then I'm like, wait a minute. But now they're calling Jews and anybody who has a divergent view from that hardcore SJW leftist movement as being a Nazi, then I see where this is going.
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, I am in no way qualified to have this kind of a conversation, but
I'll speak on it anyway.
I'll speak on it anyway.
In
I mean,
true
the
podcast fashion.
yeah, I'm just making shit up. I think that, so your sister may be right. Maybe if you spoke on those things, you would get death threats. I don't know. I also think that doesn't mean that you don't have free speech. Doesn't mean that you can't say it. There may be consequences to it, but those consequences are not, that person is not arresting you, and you're not breaking a law. So no one is actually infringing upon the right that you have to say those things. And I think that this is
Yet.
Who knows?
But
I don't know. Well, Ben, you're way.
Do you think in the current environment that would be legislated?
it was already starting to be legislated in Canada, which is what set Jordan Peterson off, because he said this, he has students who are trans and they've asked him to use a certain pronoun. He's had no problem referring to them by the pronoun they want. That's the reality of it.
Right.
The issue he had is when the government was mandating language that he has to use.
Right.
That was where his issue was. And I think people have misunderstood that initially. I don't know if people still confuse that for him, but they were referring to him as being anti-trans or transphobic, but he's really not. It's really more about free speech for him.
So I'll say this, and there are too many people and we have too much easy access to talk to each other, and it's in too short form. I think the only thing I can say is just hearing other people's stories and listening to what people have to say and connecting to human beings one-on-one, it's not an answer to whether or not there's free speech, but I don't know how we solve the issue one way or the other if we are not talking to each other. And I mean to each other and hearing each other.
Right.
And I think mostly what we're seeing, and I think this is at least rational minds, I don't even want to say that, I'm not going to assume, but I think everyone's missing the point. We're not seeing each other. We're not hearing each other. We're unable to have... Technology is killing us, like our ability to be a cohesive species, because we're missing, like you and I are looking at each other's eyes right now, and we can, there's something there. We can't really describe it, but there's micro expressions in our face that we're able to read. This is all Team Human stuff that I'm a big fan of. And I think that we miss that when we go to technology to... Like, politics is mostly being carried out on Twitter right now.
Right. You bring up, sorry, like a little aside, like you brought up Twitter and this young woman getting banned. And I'm just like, when the president of the country that we live in, which is how I refer to him, when he's not being banned on Twitter, I just like can't take that for like, well, what the fuck are they doing? Like, I don't know. Who knows?
Right. But my point
why
is,
should exceptions be made for certain people and not others?
Right.
And this is the, right. So we have this lack of humanity being carried out by humans. And so I don't know how we reconcile these issues if politics at the highest level is being carried out in this casual, unprofessional, uncompassionate 240 characters. I forget what the new expanded characters are in this way. I don't know how we have the conversation. And the other part of this is that a lot of this conversation, a lot of this quote unquote free speech is being carried out on private platforms, right? These are not government platforms. We talked earlier about YouTube maybe being a monopoly. In that case, maybe there's some government interaction that needs to happen, right? But so we have this weird interplay between a public arena.
Well, that's the debate. Is like whether it should be considered a public utility.
Right.
It's the new town. What do you call it?
Right.
Town hall.
free speech on Twitter be protected by the government, right? Like, and whether or not a private company, these big media companies, and I don't know if they're all private necessarily in ownership context, but not owned by the government, can we force them to protect free speech on their platforms? I don't know the answer to any of those questions, and this is probably unsatisfying from a like whether or not free speech is being infringed upon. I just know that the way we're carrying out conversation, and this is the reason we have podcasts, right? Because we like long form conversations where you can talk to other people and kind of work through the nuances of things. I don't know how we get to a good place. And this goes back to religion. Like, I think human beings are evolved to an us versus them, like a very, like, from our evolutionary standpoint, we like to be part of a group, and that group needs to be protected. Our evolutionary sort of monkey brain thinks that we need to protect it at all costs, regardless of whether or not we agree completely with them, but like othering the other makes us feel better.
Yeah.
I don't know, like that's.
See, I think one of the things that worries me is I feel like we live in such an echo chamber society now. And
Sure.
I heard this one YouTuber say the other day, he pointed out how he got one comment on his video that was like, dude, I don't like your view on this. I'm unfollowing or whatever. And that happens all the time.
Sure.
And people mouth off about it. But the guy was like, of course you're not going to agree with every view that I have about everything. Like, nobody agrees with,
Right.
You guys are married and you don't agree on everything,
Right.
you know? So it was good for me to hear that, because I'm like, oh yeah, right. And this same guy started, and I liked a lot of his videos, but then he posted a video about actually returning to Christianity because he became an atheist and now he's going back to it. And I'm like, I literally want to reach out to him and have him on the podcast.
Yeah,
Because I mean, he's got a big following, so
Yeah.
I don't know that he'll,
Right.
you know, be interested in my humble beginnings. But I would love to talk with him and have
Right.
because I'm like,
Well, you posted on Instagram something about free speech, and I had made some sort of comment about, like, okay, can we also require that people listen? Because it's just like what both of you are saying. So every single one of the things that I would have held to be like fundamental core values and beliefs, most of them have changed. And all of them have changed as a result of me listening to other people's experiences. Mm-hmm. None of those things would have happened without. So there are certainly always going to be people on the fringes, and maybe not even on the fringes, that will say things that will upset other people. And there is no way to mandate that people be able to come together and have these conversations. Right. But the quote of "it's hard to hate up close." It is. It's hard to say.
But I'm seeing a lot of that, and I can send you a lot of videos.
But how up
where
close
it's like,
is it? Do
like
these
literally people face to face on campus and events and
but
people?
Do they know? But they don't know each other just because they're physically in a.
But how can they get to know each other if they're face to face and they hate each other and they're yelling at each other and
Yeah, and
they
they
I
can't.
don't know.
I mean,
I don't know. And there's, are they going to therapy? I'm like, who hurt you? Like, that's the question that I just want to ask. Because there's always something behind that, right? There's always something that they were taught or an experience that they had that's now informing how they're reacting. This is how we go through the world. Yeah. And being able to hear the stories, especially when you have an extremely fringe belief, there's probably some stories and some people's experiences that you're missing out on. If you're on such an extreme, I think.
Right, like freedom of speech. I think both sides are scared. One side is scared that you're not going to be able to say, like, this is how it happens, right? Like, you start to infringe upon freedom of speech in a small way, and it expands, right? This is kind of how history has shown us, right? You start with one group, and you can expand from that group. On the other hand, I think people are also scared that the free speech that is, whether you call it hate speech or fringe speech or whatever, people are scared that a lot of people feel that way, or more people will feel that way, and so they want to restrict it. There's a natural feeling to want to restrict that, right? And for me, it's kind of scary to know that, like, on one hand, we don't want it to be true, but what if it is true? That some of these fringe groups are, I mean, I think we're seeing with the current environment, the current president, that some of these groups that we would call hate groups are classified as hate groups, depending on your definition. They seem a lot bigger than we had thought that they were before, because they're being emboldened by this new environment. And so you start to get the people who are trying to restrict speech and saying, well, that's hate speech, so you can't say it, are worried that that those ideas are spreading. And I don't know how you legislate between the two things. And is it a government's responsibility if you see the country going in a direction where you're like, oh, well, actually, most of us are racist and this is the direction our country's going in, but for free speech sake, we have to let it go? Or do they restrict that?
Well, we still have our laws, though. And if the laws aren't being changed, then you're not allowed, like, free speech has its limitations built into the law.
Right.
You can't incite violence.
Right.
You can't make threats. You can't, endanger people by yelling fire in a crowded,
Right.
So those things are already in place. So
you're worried the line is being
yeah,
brought
like,
further out.
And bringing it back to religion and Christianity and Mormonism and whatnot is like, for me, it's really frustrating because I lived my whole life in this Christian bubble where I was not allowed to be my full self. I had to constantly censor myself. Like I couldn't cuss when I was a kid. And there's also the idea of self-censorship, which is a big deal. And it's really frustrating me as a creative person because my creative process has become really fucked up because I'm like, I want to post this, but this is probably going to be considered hate speech, or it's going to be demonetized, or it's not going to be advertiser friendly. And I'm starting to reach a point where, especially with Instagram likes and followers going down, I'm ready to just kind of unplug and go to a crypto platform and BitChute and completely uncensor myself and just be my 100% true self and put that art out there into the world. Whoever hates it, hates it. Whoever likes it, likes it. It might be 7 people in the world who really like it, and that's the connection I'll have in my lasting legacy in the world. But at least it'll be satisfying to me that I spoke my voice and I was creative and I got to do what I wanted to do in my life. Because all of this self-censoring stuff is really unnerving for me and it's unsatisfying. And I felt like I finally got free of that when I left the church. And then now, with the way our society is going, it's kind of like right-wing attacks on my freedom of speech by the conservative Christian thing. And now it's like left-wing attacks on my freedom of speech. And this is why, as a person who was raised Republican Fox News guy, and then I left that and I became a registered Democrat, I voted for Obama and all that. And
at least you got that one.
And having been through all that, I'm starting to realize, like, okay, my principles are kind of freedom of speech because I don't trust power because absolute power corrupts, absolutely. Is when the right wing is in charge, they're going to start saying, well, you're not allowed to cuss in your videos because that's unbiblical or whatever, or you're not allowed to have sex before marriage. And then the left, so I'm like, I'm not a fan of the left or the right. That's why I'm kind of more of a libertarian, where I'm like, I'm all about personal freedom. And that's kind of how I feel personally. It's like, look, just let me be me. Let me express myself and be who I am in the world. And that's the same standard that I apply for everybody else. Like, I don't care if you're gay. I don't care if you're trans. I don't care if you're Islamic. You can believe and do and express yourself in whatever way. And this is the thing where I'm like, I mean, you guys are white, but I'm a brown guy. I
bet they couldn't tell.
Yeah. Right. But it's funny because like my last guest, Mike, I don't know if you heard that episode. Brian, he told me, he's like, oh, I thought he was white. He's black. Yeah. But, so I'm a brown guy and I've encountered my fair share of racism growing up, and at the same time, because I believe in the principles of freedom of speech, I still will fight for the right for a Nazi to have a legal protest and say whatever they want to say.
Right.
I may hate everything about them and everything they say, but I'll still defend their right to say it. As soon as they start actually making a threat toward any minority group or anything, I'm like, please just lock them up, because they're breaking the law.
Right.
But it's freedom of speech that's important to me because I just don't feel like one of the things I said before, I don't know if it was like the last podcast or whatever, but it was like, I don't really get angry at people for having views that I might find abhorrent is because there's reasons, like they've had their life experience that has led them
there's a story.
Yeah. And I might not like where they've ended up or where they are right now, but I understand like there's something, their life brought them there. And for me to tell them, you are 100% wrong, you need to shut up, and you're not allowed to say that anymore. Like, I'm in essence denying their existence. Like, I'm denying their path in life that brought them to that point.
Right.
So there's that. But then the other thing is, if we start censoring people who we disagree with, and I've already seen that happen now, people overusing the term Nazi and labeling anybody a Nazi if they disagree with a leftist view, that's really dangerous, because then you're like, okay, well, now I'm a Nazi, you know, and I'm like, I'm not allowed to say anything. I'm like, they've already called a Jew guy a Nazi, and I'm a brown guy, like they'll call me a Nazi, or, you know. That's why I feel like the ultimate principle is like, let people speak. And I've heard it put one way, is like, the solution to bad speech, or the solution to hate speech, is better speech, is love speech. It's not to shut them down, because you know what? If you take away their right to speak,
Yep.
you're making them into this victim, and they're going to burrow deep down, and it's going to be even worse, because then they're going to be assembling and doing all of this shit without not in the public sphere. At least when people are vocal out loud, we know, like, okay, well, that guy is a skinhead,
and can also invite them to listen, because like we said, this is how the thoughts get changed. This is how we learn about each other. This is how our ideas about things expand, is when we listen. So people are allowed to say that. And then, like in the example that you gave, then you could also invite someone to hear your story. Like, okay, you hate brown people. I'm a brown person. Would you like to hear my story of where I came from and what my life was like? And you can't make them listen. That's why I said that. I was like, I would love it if we could mandate listening.
You can't force them.
No, you can't.
But the only way they can listen is if the other person can speak, right? So I mean, right. Again, like, I think that the worry is that there are more people than we like having hateful views. And while I like your idea of like, well, we don't want to bury it down, I just think it's hard for people to hear. And so that's what we're encountering right now, is that people are worried that there's a reality that we don't want to tell ourselves the truth about. And so we'd rather not hear it rather than maybe do something about it. But yeah, I don't know how you, I am interested in what you like to post that you feel censored about. I don't know that you want to talk about it here, but
I had the same thought.
Have you posted things that you've gotten that kind of feedback about, or like, have you kind of kept a line so that you won't get that? Are you willing to try that? Like, I don't want to make you an experiment, but like, I'm interested in kind of.
Yeah, I mean, like, private conversations I have with Brian or Praveen, like, we have certain views that maybe have trickled out a little bit on the podcast, but it was kind of like, we always kind of like, all right, let's reel that back in, and like, let's not go any further in that, because we're gonna get into trouble here.
Interesting.
So like, it's weird, because a lot of this stuff is very theoretical for me, and it doesn't really matter to me personally. AOC is calling.
Jesus Christ.
I gotta mute this. Raising kids and parenting styles and public school education and vaccinations and like all these things that like, it doesn't affect me, or abortion even. It doesn't affect me personally really at all, other than the fact that it affects society and I'm part of society.
Sure.
But every day I feel less and less attached to society anyways, and I'm kind of ready to just go off, like I said earlier, in my own way. But, you know, I've had, like, Brian has a couple kids, and they go to private school, and then I asked him, and he's like, there's a Christian school. And I do think about theoretically, like, if I were raising kids, you know, like, parents would raise their kids in the way that you want to raise your kids, and you guys are going to raise your kids in the way you want to raise their kids, and he's going to raise his kids the way he wants to. And I think that's kind of just the natural order of things. But that's why I was kind of curious, like, I know you said on the Latter-Day Lesbian, like the podcast about, like, there's no such thing as your kids.
There's no such thing as other people's children?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that did not originate from me. and I'm not even sure that it originated from Glennon Doyle, but she is who I have heard say it, and she's an author, speaker, activist, and she had started saying it with all of the immigration stuff that's happening, that there's no such thing as other people's children. Like, we can't just say, well, these are like these people that were born across a border that somebody made up, by the way. That there wasn't like the earth was created and there was like a line here that clearly was like, nope, this is one country, this is the other. So now now we've separated ourselves.
So the context is we should care about other people even if they're beyond the border or
it's
something
weird,
like that.
right? Like, I think that a lot of people don't believe that that's true, that they think, nope, we live in this country, we should
Right.
care about the people that are here, and that's all we should care about. And I just think that that does not make sense in my brain.
Yeah.
And especially in terms of children, like, they're children.
Right.
What the fuck did they know
Right.
about whether or not they were born in your country or a different country? And treating them inhumanely,
Right.
like, you can't, we shouldn't do that. That's
Right.
just not a reality that should be happening right now. And I think the schools are a good example too. And we've talked about this on our podcast, that we've struggled with this a little bit. We moved a couple of years ago. We live in a fantastic school system, and our kids were going to go to fine schools, but we had the opportunity to move 10 minutes away to schools that would maybe be like a little bit better. And we took that opportunity and we moved to where the schools would be just slightly better. And I struggle with that because you can read studies and listen to an episode of This American Life that will tell you that the way that the whole school is made better is by as much integration as possible. And we are white, and we are upper middle class, and we could have stayed there, and we could have looked out for other people's children, literally other people's children, and not just cared about our own. But we could have done something that would have been beneficial to more kids, which in my heart is actually what I think we should be doing. Our daily decisions don't always play out that way, but my best, highest self would say, no, I want to help all of the kids. And if I can stay here and help all of the kids in this area, that's what I want to do. I don't know.
Well, so to kind of go back to free speech, right? Like, you're interested in protecting everyone's free speech as if it were, it's not a kid, right? It's not a human being, but you understand that this right is important for everyone to have because it allows everyone to be able to express themselves. And the concept of there's no such thing as other people's children is, again, to get to our baseline humanity. Like, everyone cares about kids. Not everybody, but it's an easier statement to make than everyone cares about all humans. And so I think trying to see the commonality in children and seeing that we should care for everyone's children because these little beings didn't get to choose where they come from.
Right.
And eventually they become adults, right? And as we were talking earlier, everyone's story leads them to a certain place.
Right.
And
Okay.
I don't know.
So
if that's the context, like, I have no problem with that. Like, that's
Sure.
I mean, that's just caring about humanity. Like,
Right.
Of course I'm for that. I think the way I maybe I misinterpreted that, the context of that quote is I've seen some things online where, and I shared it with Brian and we talked about it, where it's like sex education for kids. And for me, like, I didn't really push back when my friend Twana was on the podcast that much, but like I was kind of waiting for her to send links and for me to do more research on it. But I have seen some stuff that I find disturbing when, they had transsexuals and drag queens and stuff with little kids at like assemblies and things like that. And I just felt like that just seems too young. Like, just kids are like little kids, like, and that was part of the thing why.
what's going to happen?
Like, the thing is, this goes back to religion, is that kids are highly impressionable. So I would prefer to let kids just be kids and not, because they already live in a world where they're becoming adults way faster.
Right.
And I'm like, why do we want to keep pushing that more and more on them?
Kids being kids looks a lot like transsexuals and drag queens than you would think. That kids don't, again.
That wasn't like that when I was growing up.
You were raised in an extremely religious, conservative environment.
No, I was raised in the military in terms of going to schools. Like,
sure, but you certainly
I
had
never went to a
ideas
Christian
in
school.
your home that were accepted and were not accepted. And kids left to their own devices are free to play however they want, and they don't know if something is right or wrong. Like, in terms of like, girls are not only going to pick pink. Some girls are going to pick pink because they like pink more than they like blue.
Right.
But we're not. It isn't just this binary. Like, they all do this and they all do this, and we shouldn't allow them to think that there's any crossover. Kids are impressionable. I choose to think of that in a positive way of, yeah, we're also helping them to see that there are infinite possibilities and that people make different decisions and that you shouldn't make judgments on those people for the decisions that they make or decide that they are one thing more than the other.
So does it come down to, is the crux of it about bullying? Is that the main reason so that kids don't bully other kids?
Like in that situation, I don't know. Like for the specific example, I'm completely unfamiliar with that.
Shocker, we need context and like a long form article
right.
about what
happened. That's interesting to me. I think that the more education, especially, I think more education, the better for kids. Like, there are differences as far as,
but there's also age appropriate.
There is age appropriate, but I also think that normalizing things from a very young age, I think, is better. Like, I was raised in an extremely conservative household, and modesty was stressed, and that has led to all kinds of weird body dysmorphia and eating disorders and all kinds of things because everything is so just like... there was a moral judgment that was placed on it as opposed to just a body is a body and it's fine, and stop sexualizing children or stop sexualizing shoulders or whatever it is. Like, we're just human meat puppets, as Pete Holmes says. Like, this is what's happening. Like, we're just existing, and this is what we exist in. So I am definitely err on the side of like, educate kids as much as you can. And the topic of transgender is, I don't think it didn't exist. I think, like lots of things, we're coming to find out that it's always been around. It's not new. There were things that were and were not allowed to be discussed, and that was definitely something that was not allowed to be discussed. It's not because the people didn't exist.
But don't you also think it has to do with social engineering and kind of, like, I've seen stuff too where it's like little kids, like, if you ask a 4-year-old, like, what do you want to be? He's like, I want to be a dragon. Like, or do you believe in Santa? Like, I brought this up with Brian when he was talking about how his daughter went up to this man at the store and was like, hey, like, I think Jesus really, could be. And I'm like, and he's like, yeah, dude, she really believes in Jesus then. And I'm like, okay, my question was, does she also believe in Santa at that point? And he's like, yeah.
Yeah.
So kids they'll believe whatever their parents tell them or whatever the school tells them or whatever. So where do we draw the line in terms of
what is the belief of a transgender, like bringing the transgender person or a drag queen in? Like, what's the belief that's being put upon them, I guess? Put upon the children.
What's trying to be taught?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
Well, yeah, one of the things I worry about is like getting kids to sit there and question, like, am I a boy? Am I a girl? Like,
but also, what's wrong with them questioning that?
Well, I'm more of the mindset of like, I also think like there's male and female as opposed to the fluidity thing. And again, we talk about views evolving or whatever today, right now, that's how I see things.
Sure.
So the transgender thing is kind of new for me in the sense that I've been wrapping my head around it.
Yeah.
And it's definitely in my face every time I watch a show or anything.
Yeah. So
there's no me escaping it. I have to sit there and, do some research and stuff and find out about the science of it all and all these things. So the verdict's still out for me on that, but...
Okay, so you're seeing it as maybe they're being taught about this thing or normalizing a thing that isn't normal?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay. You're not decided yet, but
this is like, it's the Santa thing, it's the Jesus thing. It's when you tell kids that otherwise, if you didn't
Right.
engineer
They're
them
not
in this
going
way.
to. They're not going to come up with
Yeah.
Santa
Yeah,
on their own.
a boy,
Okay.
yeah.
I guess the
see what you're
difference
saying.
is up until now, no one has seen Santa or Jesus, and so those don't exist. Trans people do exist, and they are one of the most violently acted upon groups in the United States currently.
Well, their suicide rates are very high.
Absolutely.
And whether it's pre or post operative.
Right. No, I mean,
Yes.
there is a
So
lot.
There's
Yes.
clearly a lot
There's a lot going on there.
Yes.
In my mind, I don't mind. I like whoever you are is who you are, and so we should accept people as they are. And so teaching kids that there are people that are
Like,
they're all there
wouldn't be safe to just teach children, hey, everybody, people are going to be different. You know, there's going to be brown people, there's going to be tall people, there's going to be fat people. Although I don't know how you would tell a child there's fat people because you're not allowed to say fat anymore. So I don't even know. But like you could say people that are going to be different shapes and sizes, whatever.
Okay.
Okay.
So, you know, and people are going to be like, kids don't even understand sex yet. They don't even understand.
Right.
I didn't, you know, until later.
well, and
So I don't know how you're going to relay that to little kids in a way.
well,
But
gender
you could
isn't
teach them a general.
sexuality.
You
Like
could teach them a general golden rule kind of thing, like treat other people with respect, regardless of who they are. I mean, that's a core value that I think you could
Sure.
teach children of any age, and I don't think anybody would argue with that.
Correct. They might need specific examples. They might need to see what that looks like
of all those examples.
of all those examples.
Yeah.
Because we don't all learn the same way. So again, like back to hearing people's stories, like, I mean, I think in this sort of hypothetical situation, we're talking about elementary school children, but take like teenagers who might be prone to negative judgments towards a transgender woman, allowing them to be in a room and to hear a story and to see a person and put a face with a name, with an experience, might endear them to that person, might open their mind to, oh, okay, now I've seen this thing. It's not just this hypothetical that I'm going to be met with down the street at 25 or whatever it is, but you can actually see someone and see that it exists. There's tons of evidence to back up. And you probably experienced this as a kid. Like, I've heard from actors and actresses that were like, I never saw someone that looked like me on television. I wasn't represented. And they wanted to be represented. And
it's specific because, like, I was just talking about this with my sister yesterday, and I was saying how I loved Stranger Things season 3. And one of the things I had mixed feelings about it, but I was genuinely happy about it, is that they didn't try to rewrite history. Like, they didn't just insert an Indian character or an Asian character. And everybody in the show is all white, and there's like one token black kid.
there's one token black.
And I'm like,
because every neighborhood's got one.
but that's the world I grew up in the 80s.
Right.
So I feel like if they would have brought an Asian kid and an Indian kid in, and a couple of them and made it diverse, it would have really upset me.
Do
Because
you really think it would have taken away from it, though?
I mean, I would have, but here's the thing. Part of the reason why I liked it so much, because I just watched Jessica Jones right before that, which I didn't like as much. But I'm not a huge, like, the story just wasn't that interesting to me. But I feel like I see the agenda things when they come out. And I'm like,
Okay,
it
yeah.
detracts from, I'm not watching this to be preached at. I'm watching this for entertainment value.
But you're also a 42-year-old man, and I'm not hating on you for watching Stranger Things.
No, but you think about it,
But-
Stranger Things is completely targeted toward,
It is.
like,
Yeah,
it is.
nostalgia.
I
But we
was
also,
that age
you're
in
you're
that
totally
time.
right. But we also have a 9-year-old and 11-year-old, and yes, they happen to be 2 white girls, so they see Elle Man and they're on board with this. But
yeah, she's awesome. Yeah.
she's awesome.
Yeah.
But if they weren't, then that would mean something different to them to be able to see those kids, because they're not seeing the agenda. They're not feeling like they're like, oh, they just threw in the token.
Yeah,
kid for
I think
me.
my point is there's plenty of other shows out there where your kids can watch and there's a completely diverse cast. There's plenty of that. But to go back and revise history and say in the 80s
Yeah,
they were
I mean-
Indian, that would have really, because remember when I
Well,
was,
and they didn't do it,
What
and
were
I
we
don't see them
watching?
getting hate for it either.
Yeah,
I don't see
right.
people. No, people are not upset about
The
it.
internet's a large place.
I'm
Yeah,
sure. Yes, I'm sure there is
I'm
somewhere.
sure there's some
For sure.
social
What
justice
were we
For
warriors.
sure.
watching the
So-
other day where it's something we were watching that was sort of modern, and either they were being super misogynistic or
Oh, are you talking about Mrs. Maisel?
no, it was something else. Anyway, I can't remember what it was, and you were like kind of what you're like, what the fuck is going, like, why are they? And I was like, well, this is it was like in the 90s in like a white suburb or something. And I'm like, of course, I can't remember what we were watching. We were watching something and you're like, that's fucked up the way they're acting. I'm like, yeah, that was also reality, right? And like from that perspective, like I like that they don't change or try to update the views there so that we can still see history.
However, I will say this is kind of a funny tangent, but to go the opposite way, I have been confronted with a couple of different shows recently where people, they happen to be conservative Christian, and there's like either a lot of sex in a show or a lot of language in a show, and they will feel like that it's a current show that's set in history at whatever time, and they're like, oh, it wasn't really like that. People weren't really like that. And Stranger Things actually is a perfect example. My dad watched.
I love that they cuss a lot.
They cuss a lot,
3, and I love it.
And my dad said, it takes me out of it every time because kids don't talk like that. And I said, are you fucking kidding me? What fairy tale land are you?
Well, it's Mormon fairy tale land where none of the kids curse around the adults.
For me, like, I didn't really cuss like that, but I was jealous of the kids who could cuss like that.
Because they were.
Because they were. No, so I bring that up as like an opposite of like, you could be like, oh, they're rewriting history. Well, maybe they're rewriting your history, but they're not rewriting someone else's history. Maybe somebody else experienced that completely differently than you did. So that's an interesting idea. But yeah, my dad definitely didn't experience children cursing in the 80s. It didn't mean they weren't cursing.
Well, I kind of see his point is that in the shows and stuff, it was so whitewashed back then. Yeah. Nobody cussed, nobody.
Yes, on
that's true.
Correct.
But the reality,
But the reality, Mrs. Maisel on Amazon, same thing. They have a character who plays Lenny Bruce. And my sister was like, they didn't talk like that back then. I'm like, Lenny Bruce is known for how foul he was.
Right.
Like they're not making they're not making that up at all. What? Anyway, so I think exposure to kids is within what you deem appropriate. And again, there's laws against what is abuse and what is harmful to children in certain cases. So I feel like we have some like I am certainly exposing my kids to things that my parents would not think is appropriate. Yeah. But I do. Right. And I think they're better for it. And I think they'll be better for it. And so
and that's your right and responsibility as a parent is you raise your kids the way you want to raise them.
Right.
Right. And I mean in schools, almost every school district allows you to opt out of sex education specifically. And so like I think
now.
Well, I don't so my view is that we have the right and left and they're fighting against each other all the time. And I think that's a good thing because I think we're keeping it balanced.
I feel like there has to be that checks and balances.
And it's going to shift one way and it's going to go back the other way. And hopefully that we stay kind of locked in that way because I do think that if you go one way too far, the other way too far, you lose the I don't know. It's a little bit frustrating at the same time because nothing ever moves. But at the same time, like I think it keeps us locked in a tight dance.
An equilibrium of sorts.
Right. Like where it keeps it balanced, and we'll shift back and forth, and we'll be upset about all of it, and that's good, and we'll have discourse. And you know, I always wonder if every generation's like the sky is falling. You know, this is happening or that is happening, and I think it is, but I think we have too many examples in history of where it did feel like that, and it did go that way, and you know, just everyday citizens just kind of went along with how it went. And
I mean, I feel like if you look back at history in Russia, Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, all those kind of things, like the thing that was always the most dangerous,
freedom of speech.
Yeah. When you oppress groups and you demonize them and you take away their rights, like that is the path to great atrocities.
Yeah, and I think what the thing we're seeing now is that there are historically oppressed groups who are getting louder and more people are on their team, if you want to say it that way. And so it kind of seems like it's shifting a different way. But I think it's good that we're bringing oppression to the forefront and talking about systemic problems. And I think it gets a little bit dicey when we generalize too much, but I do think it's important that we talk about the status quo as being something that we should change. Like I feel like we should be progressing, right? Like we should be moving in a direction of more openness, more conversation, and not quieting voices or making sure opportunities are there for everyone. I just think we're in a very transitionary time right now where it feels kind of chaotic.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Like I'm a pessimist kind of in this sense that I can only focus on like very local, like relationships with other people. I don't like to read the news. I don't like to know what's going on. I have that privilege to make that. I don't have to care about things because of my position in life. But I do think that it's important to have conversations with people all the time and at length, disagree a little bit, have a back and forth. And that's what makes me feel more powerful. I feel very powerless when I see big ideas and big things like the national political scene. I feel very powerless when I feel very pessimistic when I see that. So I like to focus on the here and now, because I feel like that's the only thing that we have. That's how I feel. I know that's not shared. I mean, both
Well,
of you.
you feel probably less like an activist, and you probably feel more like an activist, or you would rather be more of an activist, right?
I would rather be, but I feel the same pessimism, and I feel the same. I don't feel like I have a lot of control or have a large scope to do anything. I have a very small sphere of influence, and I try.
If you had 30,000 Instagram followers, would you feel differently?
Would I feel like I had more of an influence? Whether or not I had the influence, I can't decide, but I would feel like that opportunity would be more there. And I think I would continue to say the same things that I say now. That's one thing that I have tried to do there are certain things that I would like to say to people and conversations that I would like to have, education that wasn't given to me, things that I didn't know and that I was blind to and I had the privilege to ignore. And I don't want my children to be in that situation. They have a certain amount of privilege because, again, they're white, we're upper middle class, we live in suburbia, this is our reality, but they will not be blind to what other people experience that are people who are different than them. And I was extremely blind to that. So I have a small sphere of influence. I have my kids. I have my friends who, in my particular time of life right now, I am in an echo chamber for sure. And I think because I feel so new to everything, that's where I feel comfortable. And I'm not ready to try to be outside of that.
When you say new to everything, you mean like life outside of Mormonism?
Yeah. So I mean, I would never have considered myself a feminist before. I was definitely a registered Republican. And like I just thought, all of the conservative Christian values. I was extremely pro-life and all of the things that come along with what like that sort of stereotypical thing is. And so I'm new to these ideas, and so I still am sort of like gathering my sources of information, figuring out who I want to learn from, who I want to listen to, and kind of feeling like it's like I said, like I feel unprepared to have a lot of these conversations because I just am not. It's not been something that I've done. My dad was in politics when I was growing up, and so for a long time my line was like, oh, my dad's in politics, so I don't ever like think about anything political. I never watched the news. I never did anything like that. I was like specifically trying not to. And now I'm like, okay, I'm in my 30s. I feel like this is like an adult thing. This is a responsibility I have. So, and it's interesting to me. So I kind of I'm still sort of staying in my echo chamber so that so that I can learn enough to feel like I can have conversations, I guess.
Well, yeah, I see it as like it's a process.
Yeah.
And like you're in the early phases of that leaving.
Totally.
You're the new space you described. Like, yeah, it's a journey that you're on. And I think your views are going to evolve. My views are going to evolve. Like everyone, as long as we're willing to be on that path of self-discovery and...
Well, I want people to, like I've said 1,000 times now, like I want people to listen to people's stories. So I will also listen to people's stories. That's how I've gotten to where I am now. So it will continue to evolve. I would be surprised if some of the things would make me go the other direction. Like, I feel like it's just going to sort of continue down this path where it is. It's not really going to take a U-turn to go back to being
I don't think it's
Well,
necessarily a
nothing-
direction that
Nothing's
changes.
Nothing's going to bring us
No.
back to the church.
Well, right. Well, nothing. Yeah, and so many things.
Unless God literally
I know.
walked in the door.
And
Like I said
think
before,
even
I still may be
so-
like, dude, I'm not into it, man.
Right, and well, like that's the thing is that there are so many things that are basically synonymous with Christianity and religion. So many of those beliefs,
Just toxic.
yeah, like
little
I just
bullshit.
can't. I can't
Yeah.
imagine.
Well, I don't think it so much takes a different direction. It's like it ages, it matures. I don't know, like there's more depth to it. Like we were tasting whiskey last night, and like there was one Virginia bourbon that tasted like it was aged in like a, I don't know, like a tin pan or something. Like it was very metallic. Like it was
In a good way or a bad way?
No, not in a good way.
It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great.
Like it probably wasn't aged very long. It was like very sterile tasting. It didn't have like the depth of like a bourbon in a oak barrel, a charred oak barrel, like where you get like real depth and like that's what I feel like evolution of ideas. It's not so much of like it's a different base as much as like it just, I don't know, sinks in a little more and like it just gets deeper and more nuanced, and I don't know. You see more people, you have more experience, so you can understand more things.
Yeah.
My views are just look at other people in the eyes and see the light in their eyes, and like that's all I can focus on, because I get overwhelmed outside of that. Kill the conversation.
I think we're all decent, honest, passionate people in our own way. Like the three of us. I mean, not all everybody.
yeah.
Oh, we know
just
that's not true.
just us. But yeah. So I think that's great. Like I totally agree with you about like the conversational approach, and we need more of that. Like what we're doing now, you
Right.
know, and at the same time, I would say there should be more podcasts. But on the other hand, I'm like, it's such an oversaturated market.
I know.
Right,
So-
and I mean, like I always say to Diana, like sometimes she'll want to share something, and she'll like, well, so and so already said it. I'm like, but the point is like different people hear from different
Right,
people,
yeah.
right? There's probably a million fiction books about the same exact topic, but everyone has a different favorite. They attach to things in different ways, and I think that's the important thing about having all the podcasts or the long form conversations or the articles, whatever it is. The information that people are able to consume, because I think that everyone can hear it in a different way and attach to a different way and connect in a different way that may not be available otherwise. I don't know how else you do it. I guess that's my point. Is like, okay, so yeah, it'd be great if it was quicker and more effective or whatever, but I think that's the thing. Is it's only long form, sitting down, somewhat painful, maybe having a back and forth, having disagreements and reconciling those things. I think that's the only way it happens anyway. And so there's no quick fix to the things we're doing. But you can't legislate any of that.
Right.
It's the goodness of each individual human to commit to trying. Not a podcast about
This
trying.
is not a podcast about trying.
But really, just like this constantly attempting, iterating, like repeatedly and messing up and trying again. And
Yeah.
I don't know. Like that's why I don't attach to any sort of large scale theory about anything. And again, I get overwhelmed very easily when I think of anything bigger than just the conversations we're having. But I think that's where it's at. Thankfully, other people are trying to govern and do large scale things. Otherwise, we'd have chaos. But I'm not necessarily opposed to that either.
Way to go.
All right.
Anything else?
Cool. No, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think this is really great. I love that we can have these conversations, and there's a lot of overlap there in terms of us both leaving religion, all of us, but there's also differences there. And you guys came from more of a cult-like thing than I did, but I was in my thing like longer. And my dad was a preacher, by the way. I don't know if you know that.
I did know that.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, that's a special brand.
Yeah. So, but I'm glad we can come together. We have not even gotten to AOC's question list.
We'll have to just have like a AOC rapid fire at some point.
Yeah, I was thinking about doing a rapid fire, but I don't think we have time for that
Yeah.
now. But yeah, I would love to do this again sometime.
Yeah, let's do it again. Thanks for coming all the way down
Anytime.
from Philly and coming to see us. And you're welcome in the studio anytime.
Yeah, our fancy studio.
Cool.
Yeah.
I feel privileged to be in the studio after hearing about it for so long.
So you're one of the few.
Yeah.
Thus concludes episode 9. I had such a great time recording with Ben and Diana, hearing about their Mormon days and how their transition out of Mormonism has played out these last couple of years. They're certainly on a journey of self-discovery and philosophical and spiritual exploration, as am I, and perhaps you too. To continue hearing their life story unfold, subscribe to Your Friends Podcast. They're on all the major podcast platforms, just like Confusianity, Apple, Spotify, Anchor, etc. As was also mentioned earlier, check out the Latter-Day Lesbian Podcast, specifically their July 14th episode, to hear more details on Diana's life within the Mormon Church and her departure from it. As for Confusianity, we've got one more juicy episode coming up in a couple weeks, before concluding Season 1 and returning with Season 2 later this year. If you've been enjoying listening these past few months, there's lots of little ways you can support this project. Please leave a nice rating, and even better, write up a nice little review on Apple. This will help increase the chances of more people discovering the Confusianity podcast. And of course, that'd be great if you directly share this podcast with friends and family who may be interested. And if you haven't checked out the YouTube channel, go check it out at youtube.com/Confusianity. We're just a few shy of 1,000 subscribers, and you can make it happen. Like right now. Go ahead. Thanks. Okay, other than that, check out the episode description as I've provided links to relevant videos pertaining to some key issues we discussed today, including Lindsay Shepard being banned on Twitter and what's going on with sex education in public schools, especially for very young children. Are you cool with what's happening? Are you concerned? I'm curious what you think. As always, you can reach out on social media to further discuss anything and everything we chat about on the podcast. Facebook.com/Confusianity and at Confusianity on Twitter, although I'm most active on Instagram at Instagram.com/Confusianity. All right, that's all for now. Take care, my friends.